the Pittsburgh Penguins will officially not have a first-round pick in the 2024 NHL Draft, but is it that big of a deal? I'm going to give my thoughts on that right after this.
You're Locked On Penguins, your daily podcast on the Pittsburgh Penguins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes. You can follow me on Twitter at Hunter Hodes. You can follow Pat on Twitter at Syndrome for Wet, and you can follow the show's Twitter at LO_Penguins. Of course, thank you all so much for making this your first listen/watch of the day. We are free and available on all platforms. And finally, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. And for those that may not have tuned in to the Thursday edition, Pat is not here for the Friday edition of the show. He is in Philadelphia with his girlfriend for a wedding this weekend, but don't worry, he will be back on Monday, and together we'll give you all 5 brand new episodes of the show for next week and in the weeks after. So for today, it's just me that you are stuck with. And getting into the meat of today's episode, the Pittsburgh Penguins will officially not have a first-round pick in the 2024 NHL Draft because the Carolina Hurricanes lost to the New York Rangers in 6 games on Thursday night in the second round of the 2024 Stanley Cup Playoffs. And honestly, the Hurricanes lost in heartbreaking fashion. They go down 3-0 in that series. They clawed their way back into it, a really nice win in Game 4. They win that game late in the third period. They then dominate the Rangers in Game 5, and they're dominating the Rangers for the first 40 to 45 minutes of Game 6. It's looking very likely that the Hurricanes are going to force Game 7 back at Madison Square Garden and put the fear of God into Rangers fans. But then Chris Kreider happened in the final 15 minutes, and honestly, Frederik Andersen happened as well. Kreider, he gets a natural hat trick. He was great for the Rangers in the final 15 minutes. And yes, Penguins fans, he does not just kill the Penguins. He kills every team in the Metropolitan Division. And with Andersen, he had a really bad Game 6 for the Hurricanes. And I think the goaltending position is going to be something that the Hurricanes really try to fix this offseason. I don't think Andersen played all that well in this series against the Rangers. That second goal that he allowed on Thursday night was just a puck that can't go in. It's at the side of the net. You can't allow Kreider to jam that puck in. Heck, even the first goal that he allowed, he was flopping around in his net. He was doing that quite often in the playoffs. But again, that's an area that the Hurricanes are really going to have to figure out this offseason. But because the Hurricanes did not get to the Stanley Cup final, the Penguins will not have a first-round pick in this year's draft. And honestly, am I a little annoyed? Sure, but I really don't think it's that big of a deal. I was more upset at the time of the trade that they didn't get a guaranteed first back just because I wasn't that big on the trade overall. I mean, I remember saying on the show a couple months ago that I didn't really like that Michael Bunting was kind of the centerpiece of the deal. I thought he was overpaid. I didn't like the year that he was having with the Hurricanes. And then he goes out and is a perfect fit with the Penguins, and I expect big things out of him for next year, just with the way he and Evgeny Malkin had instant chemistry on the second line. But with the way also prospect Ville Koivunen ended the season in La Liga overseas in that league, 22 goals, 56 points in 59 games. He is going to make, I think, a major push to make this team out of camp next season. He also had 5 goals, 13 points in 12 games in the playoffs for his team overseas before coming over to Wilkes-Barre. I know it was a very small sample size for Wilkes-Barre against Lehigh Valley in the AHL playoffs, but in 2 games, he had 2 points, and that goal that he scored was really nice. Sam Poulin set him up for a deflection in front. It was a really nice stick-on puck play, by Koivunen, and I'm excited to see what he can do at camp. Was I a little bit annoyed that they didn't get a Jackson Blake or a Scott Morrow back in return? Sure, but I think that would have also been, looking back at it now, the dream return for Guentzel. I think looking back, the Penguins did as well as they could have at this point, especially with the way Bunting played, with the way Koivunen played overseas, with how he looked in Wilkes-Barre. And then also Ponomarev, he also came over in the trade. I expect Ponomarev to make a push to make this team out of camp. And I do think there is a legit shot that he starts the season in the team's bottom 6 overall. So I've really come around on the trade over the last couple of months. I mean, I was someone who gave this deal a C- to a D at the time. I didn't think Kyle Dubas did that good of a job. I have since very much warmed up to the deal. I kind of have it at a B minus right now overall. I'm not going to give it a full A, but I think it's squarely in the, okay, I can accept this category to maybe close to good category for the Penguins. And I know what people are going to be talking about as well. Well, what does this mean for Jake Guentzel returning to the Penguins? What does this mean for Jake Guentzel? Well, I'm here to tell you this, people. I think it is very unlikely that Guentzel comes back to the Penguins. I've said that all along on this show. I think if he were to come back, it's unlikely, but if he were to come back, it would be mainly due to loyalty to the Penguins and to Sidney Crosby, who he had a blast playing for several seasons with the Penguins. I also think if he came back, he would be coming back at a major discount. You look at the free agent market for this year, my friends, I think it's him and Steven Stamkos in terms of forwards that are the two best forwards that are going to hit the market come July 1. And Guentzel, if he does get there and he doesn't re-sign in Carolina, while I think the Penguins will try to go after him in free agency, I don't think they're going to be able to outbid some of the other teams because Guentzel could and should get a bag in free agency. I do think the Hurricanes are going to do all they can to re-sign him. It makes a lot of sense for him to stay there just because he's everything they've needed and a lot more for quite a while. But I think he could get quite a lot of money on the open market. And overall, just going back to the first round pick too, when I look at this year's draft compared to next year's draft, this year's draft is not nearly as deep as next year's draft. So I'd rather not have a first this year compared to next year. And yeah, I know they're not going to have their own first because that's being given up to San Jose. They finished 14th in the draft lottery. So that pick goes over to the Sharks, but that's also still a trade I make every single day of the week for Erik Karlsson. Was he disappointing, at times this year? Yeah, I mean, he had his ups and downs, but towards the late stages of the season, you saw him really figure it out. And again, I do think he's going to have a pretty big year for the Penguins in 2024, 2025. And while, yeah, maybe you can argue it's a bit annoying that they didn't get a guaranteed first. I definitely was at a time before I really cooled off or on the Guentzel trade. I think overall, you look at the rest of that package, it's looking really strong for the Penguins right now. And also, you look at their overall picks for the draft this year. Not one in the first round. You have 2 second-round picks, none in the third round. You have 1 in the fourth, none in the fifth, 1 in the sixth, and then 2 in the seventh. But you still have 2 top 50 picks in this year's draft. You're not going to get a difference maker for this year or maybe next year, but you could get a difference maker in that second round with at least one of those picks that could impact the team 3 to 4 to maybe 5 years down the line when the core inevitably is not here. So you can still get a pretty decent player with that pick. It's good that they still have 2 top 50 picks. I know they don't have the first, but they got 2 in the top 50. I'll take that for sure. But those are my main thoughts on the Penguins not having a first round pick. And let me know if you've also warmed up to the Guentzel trade as well. Do you feel better about it right now, even though they're not going to be getting that first round pick in this year's draft? Let me know down in the comments. You can also send me a DM on social media and such. But that'll do it for this first segment. Coming up in the second segment, we're going to continue to talk about the Carolina Hurricanes a little bit and an RFA that the Penguins should really try and go after this offseason. But before we get to that, we got to tell you all about our first sponsor, and that is Game Time. It's the authorized ticket marketplace of the NBA, which makes getting playoff tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to the tip-off, with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. You can do last-minute deals. You can save up to 60% off buying last-minute deals for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. There's also flash deals. Save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or event. There's also zone deals. Save even more when you choose a section and let Game Time choose the seats for you. There's also seat views. You can get a full view from your seat in the app before you buy the ticket. And They have the lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, we're back here in this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes. Of course, Patrick Damp. He is in Philadelphia at a wedding for this weekend, so it's just me for this show. And after Carolina lost on Thursday night, I was listening to 32 Thoughts on Friday morning, and Elliot Friedman was discussing the Hurricanes and the roster changes that they could make. And I think you could see quite a few changes for the Hurricanes. That team reminds me a lot of the late 2000s and early 2010s San Jose Sharks teams that just can't get over the hump. I mean, those Sharks teams were really good too, but they just never had the horses to get over the hump and win a Stanley Cup. And you're seeing that right now with the Hurricanes. I also think their quantity over quality style just doesn't fully work in the playoffs. They need to try to do more quality over quantity if they want to win 4 rounds. And obviously, as I said earlier in the show, they got to figure out their goaltending situation as well. But one player that he did discuss that the Hurricanes couldn't move on from was forward Marty Necas. He is a restricted free agent this offseason. Freeman said he doesn't think it's going to work out in Carolina. He doesn't think the Hurricanes are going to do what Necas wants to do with his next contract. You look at the contract that Necas signed just a couple years ago. It was only for a couple years. He was making $3 million per season. And with the year that he just had, 24 goals, 53 points in 77 games, and the year that he had before this one with 28 goals and 71 points, 82 games, he is going to get a pretty hefty raise on that next contract. I would be stunned if it was lower than $5 million. It's probably going to be 5.5 to $6 million per year, and maybe even higher than that. He is a very underrated player in the NHL. And with him being an RFA, this is the exact type of player that I think Kyle Dubas in the front office should prioritize this offseason. He's young, 25 years old. Everyone, myself included, wants this team to get younger. Boom, you put someone like that in your lineup. That's huge. He has speed for days. He's a very quick player on his skates, and he can also bring that goal-scoring ability that this lineup really needs. I mean, I know you're going to get quite a few goals from Evgeny Malkin every year, 20-25. Sidney Crosby has shown an ability to score 30 to 35. He's the ageless wonder at this point. You know what you're going to get, I think, from Michael Bunting next year. I would be kind of surprised if he didn't score 20 to 23. I think Drew O'Connor is also going to score over 20 for next season. I think Brian Rust is also going to score 20 to 25. But Marty Necas has the ability to score at least 25 goals, if not maybe 30 plus in the NHL. He's still only 25 years old. You add him to this lineup, boom, this team is really, I think, cooking with gas for next season. There's really 3 ways the Penguins can get him on the team for next year. Number one, you offer sheet him, and that's something that you really don't see too often in the NHL. In my opinion, I think it's partly due to GMs just not wanting to piss off other GMs. But if I were a GM in the NHL, I really wouldn't give a damn. If I see an opportunity to make my team better, I'm going to do it, even if it means offer sheeting someone and pissing off an opposing general manager. You're doing your job, I think, overall. But I know you don't see many offer sheets, but that's still an option that the Penguins could do. Number 2, trading for his rights, though the Penguins would have to give up something of value to Carolina. They don't have their first for this year, so it would have to be some other pick and maybe a prospect or maybe even a roster player to make that work. And number 3, if Carolina doesn't extend him a qualifying offer before free agency, he becomes a UFA on July 1. But I don't think they're going to come to that decision. I think they're going to extend him a qualifying offer and then maybe see what they can recoup in terms of trading his rights away overall. But he has the youth that this team needs. He has the speed that this team needs. And he has the playmaking ability and the goal scoring ability that this team needs. You can put him on your first line. You can put him on your second line. Heck, you can even put him on your third line. And that's where he was playing with Carolina to end the postseason. He was on a line with Jack Drury, who has turned into a really sound player for the Hurricanes, and Jordan Martinook, who I think is also a really underrated depth option in the NHL. He was on wing on the third line. So in the end, he makes this team deeper, and he brings so many abilities that this team really lacked throughout the season. You look at also his underlying numbers throughout the season in 77 games. When he was on the ice, the Hurricanes had a whopping 58% of the shot attempts. I know that's partly due to how the Hurricanes play under Rob Brind'Amour because they throw everything at the net. They don't call them the Carolina Corsies for no reason, but when you're on the ice for almost 60% of shot attempts, you're doing something right. Goals for, goals against, 46-4, 52 against. I'm not really going to put too much stock into that considering it was 60 goals for, 52 goals against last year. Also, 55% expected goals for share, really sound number there. 55% of the scoring chances and about a little over 50% in terms of high danger goals for. High danger chances, almost at 50%. It's about 49.1 overall, but 207 for, 214 against. You're really close to 50 at that point. But his underlyings were really strong throughout the season. Again, my friends, if you are trying to make a big acquisition this summer and you are trying to go all in at least one more time for this upcoming season, at least that's what Kyle Dubas kind of hinted at during his end of media press conference, just because he's not really interested in blowing this up. This is the type of player that you go after, someone who I don't really think has reached his full potential yet. Yeah, I know he had that great year in 2022, 2023 with 28 goals, 71 points, but I think he has the ability to score 30 plus in this league. And I think he also has the ability to score 80 to 85 points in this league in the right situation. That is how high I am on Marty Necas. And if I am Kyle Dubas in the front office, I am very much looking into him. Very good counting stats, mostly very good underlyings. Young player, can make sense for both the short-term and the long-term future of this franchise. And again, even though he's an RFA, there's multiple ways for him to be on this roster for next year. So Kyle Dubas, if you somehow stumble across this episode, try and go after Marty Necas, especially if what Friedman is saying is true and that the Hurricanes and Necas might not be able to come to agreement on his next contract. I also should add that Necas does have arbitration rights for this year as an RFA, but that'll do it for the second segment. Let me know what you think about Marty Necas down in the comments. You can also send me a DM. Do you think Kyle Dubas and the front office should go after him for the Penguins for this season and in future seasons as well? But again, that'll do it for this segment. Coming up to end the show, I'm going to give my thoughts on the Stanley Cup playoffs and who I see as still the main favorites overall. Give my thoughts also on the games to come on Friday night and this weekend. But before we get to that, we got to tell you all about our next sponsor, and that is eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What the formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you'll get your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. All right, we're back here on this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes. And let's get into the Stanley Cup playoffs. Obviously, the New York Rangers, they advanced to the conference final on Thursday night. And I know it's going to be hard for people to pick against them in the conference final, but I will if the Florida Panthers are able to take out the Boston Bruins either tonight in Game 6 or in Game 7 if the Bruins are able to force Game 7 back in Sunrise. I still think when the Panthers are fully humming, they are the best team in the conference. I will take the Panthers to beat the Rangers, but I think I would take them in 7 games. So the Rangers, they showed a lot of guts winning that game. They looked to be down and out in that game. As I said earlier on, it looked like they were putting the fear of God into their entire fan base with the way they played through 40 minutes. The Hurricanes were being very stingy in their own zone, but Chris Kreider, that's what a great player does, man. And he was tremendous in that third period, and the Hurricanes had no answer for him overall. Hopefully a team in the conference final will be able to take them out so they don't go to the Stanley Cup final. And speaking of that series, that other Eastern Conference Series, Bruins-Panthers. I am going to stick with my Panthers in 6 prediction. I think the Panthers are going to be able to take care of business in Boston, but the Bruins might get a big lift tonight. Brad Marchand is a game-time decision. The Bruins have given him a shot to come back, and if he does return, that'll obviously be a big boost. Jeremy Swayman is playing his tail off in net. I still think the Bruins need a little bit more from Pastrnak in this series if they want to win it, but they're giving Florida everything it can handle and a lot more. And I also think Matthew Tkachuk, it's time for him to really make his presence felt in this series. I think he's been a little too quiet for the Cats in this one, but I do think the Cats will win this game. I think they will go on in the conference final, take on the Rangers, but who knows? I could be dead wrong on that. As for the West, that Vancouver-Edmonton series, that Game 5 was tremendous. And I feel so happy for Canucks fans. They're on the cusp of seeing their team go to the conference final for the first time since 2011. That was the year that the Canucks got to the Stanley Cup final, lost to the Boston Bruins in 7 games in very heartbreaking fashion. I know Pat and I, we've kind of joked about the Canucks and how I'm rooting for them. And yes, they're very much a mistress team for me, but just seeing how JT Miller became the hero in that game, seeing how Elias Pettersson finally had a good game for the Canucks in the playoffs, seeing how Arthur Shelovs played well. It's just a nice feel-good story. And how can you not also root for Rick Tocchet behind the bench? He's a great coach. He did great work here in Pittsburgh, and they're just a lot of fun to watch overall. They were the much better team in that game against the Oilers, and now the Oilers are up against it. If they want to push this series back to Vancouver, they need their high-end talent to be a lot better in Game 6. That Game 5 was the quietest I had ever seen Connor McDavid in a playoff game. The Canucks did an amazing job shutting him down when he had the puck on his stick. He wasn't able to generate much of anything. He played almost 25 minutes in that game, and he's been playing a lot in the playoffs. I was texting with my buddy Nick Zararis. We host the Thursday edition of the Locked On NHL National Show, and he texted me, McDavid has played over 230 minutes in the Stanley Cup playoffs so far. He's essentially playing almost half of every game, but he kind of has to, just because the Oilers are so top heavy. You look at that forward group, it's a line and a half, maybe 2 lines, and then not much in their bottom 6. So he kind of has to play that much. So I don't know if it's fatigue kicking in for McDavid, but the Canucks did a really good job shutting him down, shutting Draisaitl down. Same thing with Zach Hyman and Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. The underlyings for the McDavid line last night were not pretty at all. So if they want to send this series back to Vancouver, Oilers need their big guns to play much better in Game 6. But that series has been great. I wish we could get best of 9, best of 11 in that series. And finally, Dallas, Colorado. The Stars were doing a really good job of shutting down Makar and McKinnon for a good chunk of that series. And then Game 5 happened. That type of game from Makar and McKinnon was 2 guys looking at everyone and being like, yeah, we're not going home tonight. We are going to put everyone on our backs, and we're going to carry this team to a win. And that's what they did. Makar was tremendous all game long. McKinnon was great. You saw Casey Middlestat have a really good game, and he's been a really great acquisition for the Avalanche since coming over from the Sabres. I kind of saw that as a win-win trade for both teams, and Middlestat's been really good for the Avalanche. And now the series shifts back to Denver. I made this comparison to Nick on the national show. I also said it on here a couple of times. This feels very much like Alabama, Georgia, late 2010s SEC title games. Heck, there's a national championship game in there, I believe, as well, where it's just 2 heavyweights throwing punches back and forth. And I will say the Stars are also quite a bit of fun to watch. That's like the model team that I want the Penguins to kind of look at to try and build their teams of the future, with the way the Stars are built. 4 very deep forward lines. They have a nice mix of speed, skill, physicalness. They got a little bit of toughness in there as well, but they also got some nice, good young kids in there, namely, Stankoven. Wyatt Johnson's obviously been a revelation for the Stars. Root Bagans, though I know he's going to be out for Game 6. He's been a bit banged up, but he's been great. Jason Robertson. But then you got some of the old guys, the ageless wonder, Joe Pavelski, Jamie Benn, Tyler Seguin. It's just a really nice mix of forwards for the Stars. And that's just the type of forward group that I would love the Penguins to get at some point. Again, that's the model that I would want the Penguins to kind of look at for teams in the future. Then defensively, Haskins, great. But they just have a very mobile defensive group overall. Then Ottinger and net, he's been really strong in this series too. But wouldn't be surprised if the Avalanche do force a game 7 if the big guns show up. Again, I picked Colorado in 7 just because of their big guns, but with the way they were being shut down for a good chunk of the series, I was a bit nervous after 4 games. So then they woke up again in game 5. Let's see if they can do that again in game 6 in Denver. But those are my thoughts on the playoff series so far. Once these series finish up, Pat and I will give our conference final predictions on a future episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. But that'll do it for today's episode of the show. Thank you all so much for taking the time to listen to / watch this episode. Pat and I will be back with another show for you all on Monday, and then we'll have 4 other episodes to end the week next week as well. And then we'll continue to be daily up until free agency in July. But again, that'll do it for this one. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We'll talk with you all on Monday.